so-called Mexican miracle, which is this great expansion of the market and media in Mexico. And so they're great consumers, but they're consumers in the way that we now understand consumers, which is of course as also producers, right? That when we watch a film or when we go see an art exhibition, we're not just passively unilaterally sort of receiving things. And so they went out to the streets and they marched and they protested and they created songs and they did street theater and they plastered the city with graphics and they created this kind of verite cinema in the streets as well. And so they harnessed the city into a medium of communication that wasn't available to them. So that's one aspect of the spatial dimension. But then there's also the fact that its survivors and members of Mexico's leftist intelligentsia joined together, piloted a public memory project or a collective memory project that borrowed these techniques, but then expanded them and used what I call sort of effective and embodied and phenomenological and melodramatic ways, all these sort of embodied ways of sort of hailing you as readers and spectators to, in some way, take up this cause after the Tlatelolco massacre, which was, appeared in the moment on October 2nd as this complete annihilation of this pro-democracy movement. It seemed like, it was done, we were over. But in fact, this movement has had a tremendous sort of trajectory. It's like had multiple afterlives, and it remains to this day a major touchstone in Mexican public culture. The Yo Soy 132 movement refers to it. The Ayotzinapa campaign also refers to it, and they refer to it in name, but they also borrow aesthetic strategies from it, rhetorical strategies. But what I'm interested in is developing an interpretive framework that remains open or absolutely hospitable to what may come down the road. And so rather than trying to sort of congeal memory of '68 into something sort of very hard and immutable, that then can be very easily forgotten or torn down, that in some ways trying to develop a way of making an analytical or an interpretive model for seeing what happens with '68. And that's obviously sort of a risky gamut, because maybe no one will talk about '68 down the road, but that's the bet that I made in making that argument. Laura, thank you so much for your comments. You put your finger on a lot of the issues. One thing is that I hope that one contribution this book makes is that so one thing I sort of noticed was, this student movement, it's very sort of media and street savvy, and they seem to be sort of blurring the boundaries between different disciplines, whether it was, and also blurring these boundaries between like the body and like the environment and media. And this is all things that are not just happening, I noticed, in Mexico or within the student movement. This was happening internationally. What we see after World War II is what I refer to as and other scholars refer to as well, as a sort of a post-war reevaluation of the modern, or modernism and modernization. People are asking themselves really sort of tough questions. Artists, writers, designers, all these sort of different disciplines, they're saying, okay, well, we just had this the trauma of World War or whatever other trauma, and we also have all these amazing sort of technological advances in terms of communication. We have people suddenly thinking in a very different way, like satellite transmissions allow people to have this kind of networked sort of vision of how the world is. And so artists and architects especially are sort of developing new interdisciplinary tools and so I see a parallel between that reevaluation of modernism globally and happening also in Mexico, and how the student movement is approaching the city, and also how its narrators are harnessing the city to foment or to stoke public memory. So I think that's a really sort of key thing that you pointed to. I've already forgotten the